Hello. Welcome to the show. I am Brett, and this is my channel. And I'm here today just getting back from Washington, D.C. area, Tyson's Corner if you're living in the East Coast U.S., and had a whole day yesterday with captains and federal employees and citizens and regular people that were showing up at the Docker Summit East. So if you're not familiar, this is a new series of events that Docker's putting on that are kind of like mini one-day DockerCons. They're basically just focused on their tooling and some other people that are speaking like me, right? Not all employees are speaking. It's other people like myself from the community. And I've got lots to talk about. So thanks for joining. As usual, get your questions in early if you ask questions around Docker or DevOps. I hopefully have some advice for you. You can ask any other questions you want, but I may have nothing to say for them. I may not have your answers. So no guest today. It's just me talking to you and us having a conversation. So let me know if the audio is good, if everything looks good. I'm testing out some new software. This is, I think, the third week we're using something called Ecamm Live, which is pretty great. And it's working well so far. So it just got an update. I updated it right before the show because, I like to live fast and furious on the internet. So let me know. All right, so as always, I'll be checking the chat throughout the show, but to start off, let's jump to the browser and I'll talk about some new updates with things I'm doing and stuff you can check out. All right, as always, I just want to make sure you know about brettfisher.com/Docker. That is all my resources on everything containers, and it's an ever-increasing list of things that either I'm helping out with or things that I like to use and that sort of stuff. Most of it at the top is mostly all my resources, and you'll see coupons for my courses there. All of my courses are on sale for $10 usually, and sometimes they're on sale on other places on the internet, but never cheaper than my prices, so you should always get my courses from here. At the DockerCon, or Docker Summit, rather, yesterday, the Docker Summit, I got to meet some of the people that have taken my course, some people from the community that showed up and gave me some high fives. We took some selfies, so thank you so much. You know who you are. I appreciate you stopping by and saying hi. And yeah, it was pretty great. I got to talk on Docker production and a lot of the details you have to worry about with servers and orchestration and some of the little details, and I got a lot of good feedback. In fact, I think I ended up talking with people after my work, my talk, longer than the talk was. So I spent about an hour or so after that answering questions about everything from how to do cron jobs in Swarm to networking and how to do certain network designs for different microservice apps, things talking about ports in Swarm and on Docker servers and how to deal with that, talking to people in the federal space about being behind security boundaries, maybe classified networks, and how to use Swarm out of the box because it comes with Docker. So if you have Docker installed, you technically already have Swarm. You just have to enable it. And what was really great all day was that there was a lot of talks about Swarm all day. There was multiple people from Docker pointing out how a majority of Docker's 750 clients, including Visa and PayPal and very large institutions, are all using Swarm. And they may be using Kubernetes or looking at Kubernetes, but Swarm meets their needs and they're able to use that. And that was a great sign because as we've all wondered for the last couple of years what Docker was what their plans were for Swarm. And I've continued to point out on different blog posts, including, let's see, if you just go to brettfisher.com, I have this post on the future of Swarm where I actually interview one of the Swarm engineers. And I go through the history of Swarm and all the evidence of Docker stating that they're committed to it because their customers are paying for it and their customers like it, and that just because they're supporting Kubernetes now doesn't mean they're going to give up on their other orchestrators. And in fact, if you've been around this place a while, you know that they still have Swarm Classic, and that still exists in certain versions of Docker Enterprise that you can run out of the box. So technically, there have been points where Docker has supported 3 orchestrators in their tooling, and that's, I don't think, going to stop based on all the evidence I keep seeing. So I probably should write an updated article because this one is about 6 or 8 months old, but I would say that Swarm was mentioned at least once in every talk, and I'd say half the talks in the infrastructure room were all on Swarm, and it wasn't Docker talking. It was actually people that have done Docker deployments. It was the consulting companies that were doing Docker. I heard one consulting company talked about a project they did with Swarm on 200 nodes and nothing but Drupal containers, 5,000 Drupal containers and databases all on a single Swarm. And they've been running it for a while now, and it's been going well for them. So there was lots of Swarm talk, and as you know, I like that orchestrator because it's easy to get started, it's easy to use, and it's one of my favorites. So check out my courses over here. As you know, I have the new podcast, which basically is clips from this show. So if you're traveling or if you got a long commute and you want to hear audio versions, a lot of the stuff from this show and some of your great questions and answers get put into that podcast. So check that out down here. And then my new Node.js course, which I've been getting lots of great feedback on. And of course, you, the great students that you are, always find little issues and bugs, and I've been fixing those over the last few weeks. And the team and I are working now on some updates for Docker Mastery, as well as the new Kubernetes course that will launch later this year. So that's more stuff that we're working on. So yes. Next up for me is next week. I'm doing a workshop here in Virginia at RevolutionConf, in case you're on the East Coast. RevolutionConf is next week. And if you'd like a coupon for a discount, I believe you just reach out to me on Twitter, and I can get you a discount in case you want to attend last minute. It's actually a pretty cheap conference. It's 2 days this year, and it's for developers, but I'm doing a workshop on basically allowing you deploy on Swarm, and then you deploy on Kubernetes, and you learn how to use both from a very basic application deployment situation. And I'm calling that, I think the title I have is Swarm and or Kubernetes, try both and decide, basically, which one you might need to use. So definitely check out that conference. Some of my best friends are out there running that conference and getting ready for it right now. And so I will be speaking there. And actually, I'm doing a second workshop. It turns out, I think, on the end of day Friday. And that's going to be on civic hacking. So in America, we have something called Code for America, which is a volunteer organization. And if you are, if you are in America, and actually there are international versions now, but if you're in America and you're interested in volunteering your services for your local community, and this isn't really like PC support or anything, and it's not making free websites for organizations or whatever. This is about working with your local government and finding out how to use communities, how to make community services better. So here locally, we actually made a bus app for our bus company because they couldn't afford to make their own, and their systems were really old. So a bunch of volunteers got together, and we made a bus app now that's been being in use for 7 years now. And it's actually helped people in their careers to get more skills by using different tools and volunteering their time for their local community. So check that out. It's one of my favorite nonprofit organizations that I donate to every year, and I highly recommend it. All right, so that's enough with announcements. Let's talk about Docker's Federal Summit. So let's see if I can pull that up. So Docker is now doing a series of summits or one-day Docker events. They're really cheap to attend. I think they're like $100. They had, if you're in the public sector, it's free. But if you're at a private company or an individual, I think it's like $100 to attend. They've had them in multiple cities now, and I'm not sure when the next one is. The first one was in Atlanta. There might have been another one that I'm forgetting. And let's see if we can find a list here somewhere. No. Trying to hack the URL. Well, Docker has a website called events.docker.com. Maybe it's over there. So if you didn't know about events.docker.com, it's a combination of lots of things going on with Docker, including meetups, as well as official events from them. So you can basically search your city and find what the closest events are near you. And I'll have to, next time, see how I can figure out how to get a list of summits. Because I know that they're planning other ones. I just don't know if they're announced yet. So I'll keep you posted. Check back here next time. All right. Let's go back to the summit event page. So at the summit event, it's basically 3 tracks. and we got to have workshops. So there was workshops on security, workshops on Docker Enterprise, and one specifically on container security, which I heard about. And then this one was really interesting by Boxboat. Boxboat was a consulting company. They consult on Docker and other container solutions. And they did a lot of, actually, it was this one down here. Sorry, this tech track by Will. And Will and company, they actually talked a lot about examples. They were the ones that talked about, I believe, actually, it might have been Horton, that they had very large swarm deployments, and they were giving examples of different swarm deployments and different Kubernetes deployments that they were doing. And it was always great to hear examples. And I don't know if these are being recorded and put online. If they're put online, I'll let you know. You can always go over to YouTube to the Docker channel. That's youtube.com/dockerrun. And that will get you their page where you can basically get all the DockerCon videos. Some of my videos are on there. Some of these live shows are on there. And if you haven't made it to DockerCon before, they have all the previous years of DockerCon videos up there that you can search. And that's at youtube.com/dockerrun. All right. So lots of good things there. Again, if you are curious, by the way, about seeing me live or coming and saying hi and getting a selfie and talking about your Docker experience, I'm always looking to hear more Docker experiences from people that are using containers, how they're using them, what things they've had problems with, what things have worked well for them. So if you're ever at an event, be sure to look for me. I'm walking around the halls talking to people most of the time. And you can do that at brettfisher.com/find me. And that's usually a list of events I'm going to be at. This year, I'm taking a little bit of a break from conferences because if you looked in years past, I spent a lot of time at conferences throughout the year. And this year, I've got this one next week, and then I'm going to be in Berlin. So if you're in Central Europe, you can attend the Go to Berlin conference. That's a multi-day event. And I'll be there doing also a new workshop that I'm testing next week, essentially. But I think in Berlin, it's going to be a full-day workshop on showing you how to deploy apps on Swarm and then showing you how to deploy apps on Kubernetes and showing you some of the differences so that you can maybe understand the basics of both and help give you a better way to make a decision on which orchestrator you should choose without having to spend weeks or months figuring out all the orchestration stuff. So that's that. Let's go to some questions. I'm seeing a lot of stuff in the chat. So let's see what we got. All right, so we got a question. Going to get what I hope is a simple question and early setting the time zone on a Docker container, specifically in a Docker file. There seems to be a lot of conflicting information. Things you've found that works so far. Yep. All right. So let me take that one out. Put this one in. Put that down there. Yeah. Yeah, that looks right. That looks like it would work. Setting the time zone file. That's supposed to be 2 lines, and if in front of the run, that works, but seems a bit hacky. No, I would say that's not hacky at all. I don't know I don't have the memorized time zone command or time zone settings, but most of the things you're doing inside a container are going to be put into files or environment variables. So I would say that looks legit. And if it works, I think it works. Sometimes applications have their own time zone settings, but if you're just using doing that, as far as I know, the time zone in a container is pulled from the host. So if, or at least the time itself, I'm trying to think about the time zone. It may not set the time zone, but it will get the time from the host. So interesting. Yeah, I don't have any answers for you. If that works, it looks legit. And so the first question I would be is, like if it was me and I had a time zone issue where I needed to set the right time zone, I would go over to docs.docker.com and just search for it there, right? Time zone. And let's see, the forums, I'll turn those off. So I'll click on the docs at the top, and that way I only see the official documentation. And let's see. Yeah, I don't see anything that's popping up right at the top. The next thing I would do is then over at support. And yeah, that's going to take me to forums. So at that point, it's probably similar to what you would find on Stack Overflow. So it's one of those things where you got to try it, test it out. And as far as I know, setting files in Etsy is the way to go. So good luck with that. When do I do another Docker file and compose file review live AMA, Docker and DevOps? Oh, sorry, that's my name. That's the channel name. So another Docker file and compose file review. So we're actually working on a series of stuff like that now, and so stay tuned on announcing some plans for what we're going to do on that regard. If you are interested in getting in touch with me on a Docker file or compose file review of real production work, then definitely hit me up on Twitter or on my email address. That's brett@brettfisher.com. And I will put you in a queue but the requirements right now are if you, these need to be real compose files or Docker files that you are either currently using or you are building for real production workloads. Probably something more than just a simple hobby site. Like it would need to be something for business. And I will put you in a queue to consider you for future stuff. Basically, we're working on some things. I don't want to announce anything yet because we don't have any plans set. But I am interested in getting more of this out there and getting more reviews with you and having conversations with you about your Docker file setups and your compose files. So reach out to me on Twitter. You can DM me on Twitter or publicly tweet me on Twitter or send me an email at brett@brettfisher.com. Any of those ways work. If you're also in my Docker Mastery Slack, of course, you can always reach me there. Send me a private DM in Slack as well if you want to do that. And we'll have a conversation. More on that soon. But thanks for asking. Let's see. So, looks like we got a question on getting started with Docker. So, welcome to the show. That's what I do. You can find the first thing I recommend to anyone getting started with Docker is to take my Docker Mastery course, because that is designed for new people. So that's down here on brettfisher.com/Docker. You can see right here, Docker Mastery video course. That course will give you over 10 hours of content that starts from day one. It assumes you don't know anything about Docker and that you don't even know why Docker exists. And so it starts from there. It starts basic, and it helps you set up Docker on your machine, gets you started with basic commands, and then it builds and goes on from there. And then after that course, there's options at the end for different things you should do. So that's what I recommend. That's the reason that I do this, is to help people learn Docker starting from the beginning and then eventually getting you into more advanced scenarios like production. And you'll see more courses on that, but that's the one that I always have everybody starting with. And that was a big discussion yesterday at the Docker Summit, where a lot of people were coming up. People come up to me and always thank me for the courses, and I'm always so grateful to meet students and hear about their real world stories of using Docker, especially after they've learned it from me and they've then had to apply it in the real world and to get feedback on how the course is doing and how it's helped them. And it sounds like it's working. It sounds like people are able to get the job done. So look around. I'm sure there's some other people in chat that will give you the thumbs up that this is a good thing. You should try it out. I don't have any books, by the way. I don't write books. I feel like videos and interactive solutions are more, and audio podcasts and YouTube live shows like this. Like, I feel like that's more engaging than books. But if you're someone who wants to read books, I recommend other Docker Captain books. There, if you go to docker.com slash, actually, I think it's actually github.com slash Docker Captains. Yes. So Docker Captain slash about. I'll put that in chat. That page is actually a list of a lot of resources that the captains make. So one of the nice things about getting books or things from the captains is you know that you're getting basically the Docker opinionated way of running containers instead of someone who just read the manual. You're getting people that have had official training and they get lots of support from Docker and materials to make sure that they know what they're talking about, and they're sort of classified by Docker as experts on a portion of the tooling. So you can find books on there. There's a Kubernetes book. There's other books there. So if you're specifically needing books, that's the way to go. My course will likely be cheaper than a book, and you can get 10 hours of video for cheaper than a book. So I would recommend trying that first. Let's see. Let me scroll back up here. Hello. I got. I'm just reading through the comments. Got some thank yous from people. You're most welcome. Oh yes, thanks, Beth. Use promo code FisherGoTo for my workshop at GoToConf. So if you're going to be in Berlin or in the area of Germany and you're interested in the GoTo conference in October, you can use my promo code FisherGoTo and get a discount on signing up there, including my workshop. Thanks for that. All right, so another question here: Do you prefer containers with name or without it? Is there any best practice? So for your local machine doesn't matter, right? If you want to create names for things, it's easier to address them. But eventually, you're going to be using tools like Docker Compose, and then in production, other tools like Docker Swarm or Kubernetes or ECS, and all of those tools manage the naming of your containers for you. So it's really, once you learn the basics of Docker Run, once you get to real day-to-day Docker use, you won't be manually doing Docker runs a lot. And when you do, you're normally not creating long-running containers that you need to have good names for. I would say the exceptions for me are I often will do basic HTML editing on just static HTML sites or a static site generator where you're just creating markdown data or some sort of HTML data, and it's just creating a static web page for that. So what I do in those cases, I just spin up my own little Nginx container, and I will name it like workshop because maybe I'm working on a workshop set of slides in HTML or Markdown. And so I will manually create that container with the Docker run because the command I know by heart and it's very short. But normally, I'd say 99% of the time, if you're doing local Docker, my recommendation is Docker Compose because it's a way easier command. You don't have to remember everything. You just type Docker Compose up. That's all in my course. So if you get Docker Mastery, you learn all of that as a part of the standard Docker workflow. And it's my favorite way to do it. So that's what I recommend. All right, so that's the end of the questions. Be sure to keep asking more of your questions. I'm going to mention a few more things and give you a little bit more time to ask any more questions in case you do. So over on, let's see, Docker's, did I have it up? I thought I had it up here. Over on Docker's YouTube page, they have started posting videos from DockerCon. So if you weren't able to make it to DockerCon this year, they slowly sort of drip out different videos from the sessions, and let's see if I can find a couple that I know I can recommend. Let's see. So the depend on Docker for AI session. Let's see. I'll actually paste this in the chat. The depend on Docker session was from a Docker captain, and I actually talked to him for a little bit about this after his talk. So it sounded really interesting. I don't personally work on AI yet, so it was not something that I had direct experience, but it sounded like a really great session talking about AI solutions and how you would possibly use Docker for that stuff. Let's see what else. So the open source summit stuff, if you're really focused on open source tooling, there's some that are labeled open source summit, and those were all on the last day of DockerCon, and they're usually very great because it's essentially it's a very casual setting where it's maybe the maintainers of an open source project related around Docker or Kubernetes or something with containers, and they're usually on stage and they'll do a few little demos about what they're working on right now, but then they just take questions from the audience and it ends up becoming a back and forth, and it was really cool. So the one, of course, that I'm going to recommend is related to the orchestrator you care about. So there's one here on Kubernetes, and there's another one on SwarmKit, which looks like it has not been uploaded yet. Oh, wait. Oops. Go back over here. See if I can find it. No, there's nothing on SwarmKit up yet. So the SwarmKit video evidently is still one of the ones to be posted, but I will definitely be mentioning that on the show because I was there, and it was if you're interested at all in Swarm or if you're using Swarm, it was a fantastic session on Swarm. There was multiple stuff on Swarm throughout the week, but it was the maintainers of Swarm and them talking about the team, and right now they're hiring because they've had some people leave Docker, sort of standard developer attrition in the startup space, and they're looking for more distributed computing experts or developers in order to help work on the team. That the Swarm team versus the Kubernetes team, what their goals are for Swarm versus Kubernetes, and how they're not necessarily trying to compete with Kubernetes. They're just trying to take the best features, the most popular features from other orchestrators, and make them super simple to use in Swarm. And that's why you're going to always see a subset of Kubernetes features in Swarm. You'll never see Swarm truly competing on the list of features because there's just no way that Docker could employ all the people to even keep up with what's going on in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So that was a really interesting conversation. They talked about upcoming features and pull requests that they're working on, including cron jobs and what was else? CSI, so a standard storage interface that is being used in Kubernetes side. So hopefully if Docker were to adopt the CSI, there would be a very similar connection, so that way you could use essentially the same drivers from Kubernetes in Swarm as well, and we would basically have an easier storage volume type ecosystem there. So it was a really great time. I think it was at least an hour and a half long. So I'm looking forward to whenever they post that. If you're not wanting to wait on YouTube, you can always go to DockerCon. Oh, not Docker.com, DockerCon.com. And the DockerCon page has this little watch videos button. It'll take you to their sort of private stuff here, and then you can look up SwarmKit. All right, Swarm. Oh, see, and this is part of the problem with this website is like it only searches titles, so it's hard to find things. Open source summit. BuildKit, by the way, if you're interested at all in BuildKit, was a really good one. And let's see. I don't see the one on SwarmKit here. I'm going to ask about that. I'm going to find out what's the deal with the SwarmKit. Why isn't it up there? The other one that I would probably recommend is the Compose in Docker app. So if you're using Docker Compose locally and you like the Stacks interface to Swarm and you would like that sort of thing in Kubernetes, which now exists, it's called Compose for Kubernetes. And the standard behind that and how they're creating this easier way to deploy apps on either orchestrator. That's the Compose in Docker app video. You definitely would want to check that out. Let me just give you the link to that. All right. Jumping back into the questions for a minute. Let's see. Question, be interested to see various examples or tutorials of Docker Swarm on a single node server. You can see those in my Swarm Mastery course. So that is over, that's a lot of that's in Docker. There's some examples that you deploy on Docker Mastery. You also can look at other stuff in Swarm Mastery in case you're truly interested on Swarm in production. A lot of that is in my dog versus cat repo. And that's over on GitHub, which is nothing but Swarm examples. And those all can be deployed on a single server. When you deploy on Swarm, it doesn't really matter whether it's a single server or 10 servers or 100 servers. Your app's going to act the same way with all the defaults out of the box at least. So it's going to use the standard overlay networking. So it's going to act and behave just like Docker Compose does locally. So you don't really need special solutions for a single node swarm. You just Docker Swarm init to create the swarm, and then you deploy your app on it, and you're done. Right? You're using Compose files that are basically the same thing as stack files, and you're using those files there. So definitely check out this repo, dog versus cat. I have more than a few demos in here, including a Ghost blog, a static HTML website, the voting app, which is a sort of microservice architecture app. Several of those include databases and storage. And then down at the bottom, it's actually the talk I did on those demos from DockerCon last year, and you can watch all that there. So do check those out. All right. All right, so question on, did I try, I think it's for me. Did you try Docker Build X? Yes. So that's the new way to use BuildKit, and it's really interesting. It's got a lot of new features that a lot of us are trying to still figure out. So I'm lucky enough to be on the beta program. So if you go to beta.docker.com, you can sign up for all the new betas from Docker, including Docker Enterprise 3.0, which is supposed to come out in next month in June, and then Docker Desktop Enterprise or Docker Desktop Enterprise, which is what I'm testing. It gives you a new GUI. It gives you additional command line tools called plugins, and one of those that is going to come with the free version as well as the paid version of Docker is called BuildX, and that gives me an advanced builder that with new features, it's faster. It has the potential to make smaller images. You can use more flexible stuff. I talk a lot about that in my Node.js course. So even if you're not interested in Node.js, if you just want to see some of the latest features and you're willing to spend $10, go check out my Docker for Node.js course. I have the coupon here on my website, and you can get that. And I go through examples of how to use Docker Build Kit, which is now using, before this version, basically you would have to set an environment variable, and then Docker build commands would use the new builder. Now we have a totally new command with the new upcoming release that's still in beta, and it's going to be called Docker Build X. And that'll allow you to do a lot of things, but one of those things is it'll automatically use the new builder toolkit called BuildKit. And that's going to give you the advantages right out of the box. So it'll allow you to use the old builder or the builder we all know today to make images with Docker Build. And then if you want to use the new one, you would use Docker Build X, which I think is a pretty creative way to ensure backwards compatibility, because that's a big thing for Docker, is to make sure that they don't break anything backwards if they can. And they're always trying to ensure backwards compatibility. And then, but still allow new features and new functionality. So now we're going to get two of those commands. Great question. Let's see. So it's a question about 20 of the 1,000 most popular Docker containers have no root password. So I would say that a large portion of the people that are talking about, and I haven't read this article, but a lot of the ones that I have read are mostly FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's an acronym for basically creating news out of something that is largely not news. So the whole thing about no password in these containers basically comes down to a particular version of a base image that has a setting. So basically, there's an empty password for the root account, but it's not normally enabled in images, and in fact, it's not enabled on any of the default images that you would use, like Apache, like if you would use Apache or MySQL or stuff like that. It's just not enabled there. As far as I know, everything I've looked at, it's not enabled. It's only in other people's images that you probably aren't using. Other people, anyone can post software on Docker Hub. Anyone can post software on GitHub. But I think, let me see if I can look at that link and scan it real quick, because I don't know what they're talking about, but specifically. Yeah, I did read this one, and I mean, he makes a couple of comments that this is not a huge deal. Here's the quote: an attacker who compromised your system via an unrelated security vulnerability, meaning something else that they did to get into your container with shell access, could elevate their privileges to root within the container. Yeah, so like he found all these lists of containers, and they are from some decent sized names, HashiCorp, some from Microsoft, but Mesosphere, but a lot of them are just things that I've never even heard of, like GovUK, government, PAS, stuff like that. I've not heard of these images, so they might be popular. And by the way, popular doesn't necessarily mean that it's not like GitHub stars, right? He's doing it based on pull request, I believe. And if you have a deployment system and you just regularly deploy all day, every day, you're going to have a ton of pulls, which is going to rank you up in the rankings, which doesn't really mean that a lot of people are using your app. It may just mean that you're the only one, but you happen to deploy or pull the image a lot. And I think, I'm not sure how he says, I haven't looked at the script, so I haven't figured out exactly whether it's on GitHub Star or Docker Hub stars or whatever. So anyway, it's an interesting conversation, and certainly we should be aware of it, right? But I bet that if I went to 9 out of 10 or even 10 out of 10 people and looked at the containers they're using, this is not a vulnerability that's going to be at risk for them. They're probably not using any of these containers. It doesn't sound like any of the things that he's talking about are official containers from Docker. And I would argue that, unfortunately, most people are still using root as the user in their containers, because if you a lot of the default images, it doesn't use the least privileged user by default. That's true of the Node image, by the way. So if you're using like my Node.js course, I was talking there about how to switch that user to use the Node user instead of the default root user. So if you're already root in the container because you're using images that default to the root user, which is a lot of them, a very, very large amount of them, then this isn't even really an issue because you're already root, right? So if you were to be hacked by some other means, they're going to be root in the container anyway. So the thing I read about the actual vulnerability was the fact that you had to enable a couple of things that weren't on by default in the container to make that vulnerability. So I personally read all that stuff, decided that I know that I don't do that on any of my systems, so I'm not. None of my customers are in that boat and haven't enabled that way. So, yeah, that's my thoughts. But as always, right? Like you should probably evaluate it on your own. See that if making sure that you're not enabling these users. I think it's through the PAM, something with to do with the PAM libraries or system, the PAM system on there. Let's see if there's any comments at the end. Yeah. Nope. But great question. I'm glad you brought it up. Is it better to install, let's see. Is it better to install Docker from system repositories or the way I learned, I think, from my curl? So, yeah, so you can't, all right. So really what you shouldn't be doing is installing from the default repositories that come with your distribution. You're always going to get really old versions of Docker if you do that. So the script that you're talking about is like right here. I think that's the one I just put up there. Yeah, so that script, that's a shortcut for you to add the repositories from Docker's official repos and then install it using apt or yum or whatever your package manager is, right? And so that's fine, but in production, you're probably not going to want to use that script unless you pin versions with the script. Usually what people will do is they will go to the Docker official documentation. So if you just like search Docker install CentOS, for example, that's going to take you to the Docker docs page for installing it on CentOS. And if you, for your version of CentOS, if you take the directions and you sort of put them all in your own little shell script, it's a very small set of commands that basically add their repos, add setting up the repository, and then finally down at the bottom doing the install of Docker, right? So once you've done that, you're going to want to pin to that specific versions on your production servers or any servers really that you're using so that you get the same consistent version of Docker. And they don't talk about that up here, but they do talk a little bit about that up here, or down at the bottom rather. So make sure that you're doing that on your real servers. The install script that you have there, it might actually have... it might have a way for you to set an environment variable for version. You can definitely set the channel. So this is a way to set environment variables for which channel to use, whether you're using beta or stable. And so obviously in production, you're going to want to use stable. But what I don't know is if you can pin versions. Yeah, see, I don't see the version. I'm guessing it just does the latest version from that channel. And I don't see any environment variables for version. So I'm going to say that, yeah, don't use this script on servers. I do it in the course for just a quick, easy way to get Docker installed for learning Docker. Basically, when you're learning Docker, you need the latest version. And so that's what I do there. But for production, you're going to want to follow the official Docker documentation for even like on Windows. A great example is if you're installing it on Windows Server, you're not going to install Docker Desktop. You're going to install it through PowerShell, and the Microsoft documentation is different than the Docker documentation. And so I always recommend using the Docker documentation because theirs is more up to date than the MSDN articles that are on the Microsoft site. So even for Microsoft, I would say use Docker's way to do it. All right. Good question. So about data persistence, I'm confused about volumes and bind mounts. I don't know when I should use them if I'm a developer. So the easy way to remember for local development is volumes are going to be for your database storage or Redis or Redis or key value storage, anything that has persistent storage like that. And bind mounts are for your code. So your code is going to live somewhere on your host machine, and you're going to want to bind mount that in the container at runtime so that when you're editing files on your host, the container sees them as you edit them, as you save them, right? So I talk about that in Docker Mastery, that you need to know both, and then we go through examples of how to bind mount code and also how to use volumes with databases. Out of the box, if you use a Docker official image for MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, Oracle, all those different database tools, Redis, any of those persistent storage needs, they're all going to use volumes automatically to store their databases. But it's up to you to decide how you want to name those volumes, if you want them to be anonymous volumes, and I cover all of that in Docker Mastery. So great question. So not a Docker question, but since you talk about your extensive Node experience, what do you like for a Node SSH library? So my Node experience is largely not about developing full-fledged Node apps. What I am usually doing with a Node team is I'm working with them on making sure that they're, basically I'm doing the DevOps and builds stuff. I'm not necessarily doing pure dev stuff. So I'm not going to have an opinion on SSH libraries. What I'm going to be focused on is what node versions are we using, what security vulnerabilities are we dealing with, are our packages up to date, how is your package JSON formatted, is your lock file set up properly, where are your files and directories that are in the container at the proper way, are we building an efficient image, are we keeping your dev dependencies out of production, all those sorts of DevOpsy concerns. I'm going to leave it up to the full-time node developers to do the full-time node development. In the past, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, I think I spent about a year and a half doing Express development as well as Meteor.js. I did a lot of that, but I haven't had a full-time gig doing node development since then. So in terms of specific libraries like that, I'm not going to be able to tell you. I'm not going to have an opinion one way or the other. Let's see. Oh, John's talking about bind mounts. Where can you find information on the Docker buildx bake file? So this is a question about a beta feature in the upcoming version of Docker. So if you're on the documentation website, the first thing you're going to do is change your version of the documentation to Edge, and it's of nightly. All right, see about Docker CE for okay, they've changed it. So my answer is going to be, it's going to be in the documentation. If it's not in the documentation, then Docker hasn't written it yet. And so their documentation team is going to be behind the engineering team, and their goal is to have the documentation updated by the release, which we're still in beta, so it may not have been built yet. So I would do a buildx search inside, and if you don't see it, then yes, because they don't have a 1903 yet. So the next thing you would do then is you can actually go to the if you go over here to request doc changes, or either that or edit this page, either one, it'll take you to the repo for the documentation. And you don't really want to fill this out. What you want to do is it's a shortcut to get you to the GitHub page, and you can go into issues or pull requests, delete all this out, and then search on buildx. And there you go. You're going to find probably people working on branches of the documentation specifically for the new features, right? And so you can jump into that issue or that PR, and it may be closed or it may be open. In this case, it's open, which means it's not merged. It's not going to show up on the docs site, but there is work going on. And so you can start looking through either their comments or just jump into the files that are changed themselves. And these are images, and it looks like they're adding documentation through here. So I would go check that out. It's the other cool thing is if it's a pull request, and let's see if this is true. On the doc site in the pull request, it will automatically build. This is one cool thing if you ever use Netlify. Basically, when someone creates a PR in the documentation on GitHub, it will create a whole new doc site with just those changes. So now I can go to this website and look at the beta updates of the documentation. And now I can search here, hopefully. And it looks like it's still oh, you know why? Because this is like a Google search, I think, built into it. So it looks like I probably can't use the search, but what I can do is if I know what files, if I wanted to just see the HTML version of this page and rather than reading the markdown, if I'm just going for Docker for Mac multi-arc, so then I can go basically go down the documentation and let's see, product manuals, Docker for Mac. See if I can't find. Look at that. I found the right page. I was lucky. Docker for Mac, multi-arc. So, and then in this page, I can do a Docker X. Buildx. And there we go. I start to see the documentation coming in here, and it may help you. It may not. But that's how I would do it. And if I don't see it there, then I would basically keep tabs on the GitHub page over here, and I would, every couple of days I'd come in and do a search on Docker X. The last thing you can do, and I will say this, is that you can jump into the Docker community Slack. And let's see if I can find how to sign up for that. Docker community. So Docker community Slack has Docker employees in it, and they sometimes respond to issues. And let's see. I'm assuming. Yeah, join Slack. So I'll throw that link in there for you. And if you're obviously I have my Slack for my courses, but this Slack allows you to join the Docker community where all of the captains hang out and a lot of the community is there. So you can also ask questions in there. Find a channel related to Build X or Build Kit, because I know there is a area specifically for Build Kit there, and you can ask your questions and hopefully get some help there as well. Hopefully that will get you what you need. All right. Here's a question. What is a microservice? It is a small service or is a simple definition? I'm sorry for that, but I don't have much experience. Microservice, so traditionally when you make an application, you would put everything in a single repo and then you would make all your code in that app for the application, right? And usually microservices are related around web services, not always, but often that they are web services. And so the idea of microservicing something is to instead of, like, say you have a web API and you've got a whole bunch of endpoints, maybe you have dozens of endpoints, you might break those up into smaller subject areas and then create different repositories and separate out your code so that you can then launch different parts of your API as different containers. And that way the idea is that you're able to quicker deploy new updates because you're not updating the whole big app and you're not working on the whole big app. You're breaking the problems into smaller chunks. And so there's lots of courses out there. There's lots of documentation on microservices. So I would say definitely Google around. You'll find lots of blog articles from experts on that are way smarter than me. But you can do microservices outside of containers. But usually nowadays, the only way to do microservices in a large when you're doing dozens and dozens of them, you're going to want to have them all in containers because containers make it really easy to deploy lots of little containers, lots of small parts of an app. Otherwise, if you weren't using containers, you would have to spin up lots of different applications all at the same time in order to do your local testing and development a lot of times. So to me, the only sane way to work on microservices locally is to use something like Docker Compose, where it will manage a lot of that setup and running of things for you. So it's just a different way. The opposite of microservice is sort of a monolith. That's sort of the way we've been doing things for a while now, where you create one application, everything's in that one repo. When you start up the PHP or the Node app or .NET app, it's all inside that one executables code, and then you would talk to that one application directly versus lots of different little apps. Maybe this app over here is just for authentication. Maybe this one's just for getting blog posts. Maybe this one's for uploading images for your blog post. You would have different parts of it laid out and different URLs. So, but yeah, good question. Is the DCA exam worth it? That is a good question, and it's the question you should ask about every certification. I would say that it's worth it if you're going to work for a company that is going to be using Docker's toolkit, right? If they're people that are using Docker, the Docker Certified Associate is designed for someone who's going to run Docker Enterprise. So if you don't have any plans to look for a job that's running Docker Enterprise or to apply for a job or in your company, if you're not running Docker Enterprise, then I don't know how much it's going to be worth it for you to have it. If you're a company that's going to be running Kubernetes, then you should go look for Kubernetes certification. If you're going to be running Amazon's ECS and their way of doing containers, then you should probably go look at an Amazon certification. So it really kind of depends on what your company is doing, what are your career goals, what jobs are you trying to get. For example, for me, I don't have any customers that are running on Red Hat, and I don't use it a whole lot, so it would not really help me to go get a Red Hat certification, even though I'm an operator of Linux systems, and in theory, all of the certifications would help me. But at a certain point, once you get enough certifications in your career, you tend to not get as many more. Like I have over 30, so I don't usually get a whole lot of new ones. The last one I took was the DCA, and I'll probably be taking the Kubernetes ones as the next ones. But at a certain point, you've taken enough of them, and you feel like, a lot of times certifications are just there because of vendors. The vendors want to provide people a way to show others they know how to use their products, right? So if your company is not going to be using Docker products, what benefit is it? And that's true of any certification. So yes, I know lots of my students go get it. I know people stand in line to get certified at DockerCon event. So they always do certification testing at DockerCon, and people are always there. So I don't know the numbers on how many people are certified, but it's been out for a couple of years now. I think it's a year and a half at least that certification's been out. They are going to be updating it later this year. So if you plan on taking it, I would take it soon. Otherwise, wait until everybody refreshes their documentation and all their study guides and stuff after the update later this year. I don't have any dates. In fact, Docker doesn't know dates yet. But I'm going to guess at least a couple of months to get it done before they change it. But once they update it, it'll be based on the new versions of Docker Enterprise. The current DCA is based on, I think, like the 1.1 release or something. I think it's it's a release before 2.0, because 2.0 came out last year, and they haven't updated since then either. So, good question. Josh asks, how would you handle multiple Git repos with services and a main stack file? Would you create a Symlink repo? So, no, a Symlink repo. So, if you have a stack file and your stack file is pointing to images, I'm not sure why you would care about your design of GitHub repos, right? Or Git repos in general, because your stack file is going to be pointing to all of your your Docker Hub images, whatever you're running in your image registry, and it's not going to be pointing to your GitHub repos. So I'm not sure. Maybe give me a little bit more information, and maybe I can better answer that question, exactly what you're talking about. All right, let's see. This is a longer one. Suggestions for shared storage in a cluster. Ideally, I'd like to act like a regular volume mount. And let's see, sorry. I'd like to act like a regular volume mount. Let me start over. Suggestions for a shared storage in a cluster. Ideally, I'd like to act like a regular volume mount where every node on the cluster is able to mount and access the same files. Docker for AWS uses the Cloud Store driver for EFS, but performance is bad with large files. I've looked into GlusterFS, but haven't tried it yet. All right, so this question is largely about storage itself. It's not so much related to Docker, because if you're getting bad performance on EFS, I'm almost certain that's not going to be due to Docker connecting your system to that storage, right? Storage drivers in Docker, if you're talking about EFS or EBS or any other cloud storage solution, the job of the storage driver or the plugin in Docker is really just to get the right node to talk to that service from the provider. So if you're even using the performance version of EFS, because EFS has two different speeds, and if you're using the performance version and it's still not working as fast as you want, you've got really two other choices. Either you're going to have to use EBS, which is going to be more higher performance, or possibly even local disk. But if you're going to do that and you need everything to access those files, in other words, you need multiple nodes to access those files, you're going to need some sort of replication. And that replication, there are lots of tools. There's, like you mentioned, GlusterFS. There's Ceph. There is Portworx. Portworx is probably the only production, because I'm not necessarily an expert in all the different vendors in this space, but Portworx is a production data clustering solution. And Portworx. Is their website down? Let's just Google it. So Portworx, yeah, in fact, they just got a new series of funding. I remember reading this like a month ago. Yeah, so it's a paid product. And here's the thing about storage. So the minute you go from cloud storage to a replication storage solution, you're putting all of your data's hands in that solution, right? If you're trusting Amazon to EBS or EFS, you're trusting that they're providing a quality service, quality code that's not going to corrupt your data, right? Because if they did corrupt your data, they're running such huge data centers, they're probably going to corrupt everyone's data, and it's going to be a big nightmare. So, and they do backups and all that sort of thing for you, right? They're replicating that on disk and off disk, and I think it's always in 3 places. So you have protections there. The minute you go to something on your own, where you're using either a shared nothing storage, where it's basically some sort of driver or solution that is using the storage of another server on the server you're on, that's called shared nothing, or you're replicating the storage with something like Portworx or Ceph, those solutions, you're basically relying on that vendor for protecting your data. And so you have to be very careful about going and picking up open source projects. Personally, I would have to be very, very comfortable with an open source project before I would want the storage solution to be an open source, unsupported, there's no paid support, there's no vendor support of a product that I'm running on my production data, because I'm pretty sure that if I corrupted all the data accidentally because I updated and there's a bug or something, I probably would lose my job. So I am very cautious about that. It's the most cautious thing I ever do on production servers is offset my storage to a different vendor solution. I would much rather use the cloud vendor solution. So if EFS simply isn't workable for you, you might, it's going to be tough. You're going to have to go through probably with a vendor solution like that. And again, that's not so much related to Docker or Kubernetes or something like that. That is more related to just the storage ecosystem. So another thing you can do is you can go to landscape.cncf.io. And let's see if I can search. So CNCF is basically this organization that's collecting all of the tools and companies that are saying we make cloud native tooling and software and projects. And that implies containers. So if you're going to look for storage vendors and storage projects, you're probably going to want to do it here rather than just doing a Google. Let's see. Category. Not sure why it's not letting me click. I think it's what I want, card mode. Yeah. And so category. Let's see. Did I miss it? Looking for storage. Oh, cloud native storage. All right. And so, yeah, you're going to see all these projects here. Some of them will be open source projects. Some will be vendor backed. Some will be specialized hardware like NetApp, something like that. So I would look through there for solutions. And then you've got to drill down to solutions that would work with your orchestrator or your runtime, right? And that's probably one of the most important things you're ever going to do on a project. And so the solution is going to be very dependent upon your requirements, right? Does everyone really need to access the same file at the same time? Or do they just need access to that file when their container is running on their node, right? Do you really need to have a bunch of different containers at the exact same time, all accessing the same file? A lot of cases, that's not true. You don't actually need that. So those different types of solutions, you get into the nuances of that, and you come up with requirements, and then you go out and you try to figure that out. So that's kind of a project, and it's hard for me to recommend any one solution based on that. So, but it's a great question, and it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all for any of that stuff. and test a lot. That's the other recommendation I have. Test taking servers down, taking containers down while you're writing data, while you're reading data, see what happens, see how it handles your, any data potential corruption issues or any failure issues, because you definitely don't want to find out in production that, oh, look, when I reboot the server, the driver doesn't automatically reconnect the storage due to a bug, which is something that I've seen on real life systems before. That was years ago. I'm pretty sure that bug was fixed, but it was with some Rexray driver on a particular cloud vendor. So yeah, there's stuff like that out there. All right. Yeah, people talking about storage. Question here. Do you have any experience with using queues in Docker? Is it possible? Or do I need other tools or online services? So a queue is just a type of app, right? Whether you're running a key value store or a database or a service bus or an API or web server, those are all just the app layer. Docker and Kubernetes and Swarm and all ECS and all these container tools, they run at a lower level. So they run whatever apps run on your system. They're just running standard executables, and they have typical TCP IP networking, right? So yes, it's going to work. It's just a question of, is the one you want to use, if you're talking about a vendor product or open source project, is it already in a container? Is that the preferred container in the ecosystem? Is it vendor supported? How do you deal with making sure that it's always available and up and those are all unique to the specific product and project you're using, right? So yes, I don't have any recommendations because everything works in a container, because if it's a standard application, it runs in a container. A container is really nothing more than an application with security boundaries around it and resource limitations, if you so choose to do that. And it isolates it on the networking, it isolates it from the file system, but it's just a standard app. It's just a standard thing running on Windows or Linux, right? And so, yeah, it looks like a couple of you are talking about the file system stuff, so that's great. I know a lot of people that use NetApp storage because they're in a data center and they have their own hardware. I know people running HPE. That's something that I actually test in a data center a while back, and they had their own drivers for Docker. Portworx is listed on here. And yeah, Rexray is something that's commonly recommended as an open source tool, but Rexray connects you to existing storage. It doesn't provide you storage replication or any advanced storage solution. It simply lets you use your own storage, whatever that is, whether it's cloud storage or a storage vendor, and it just connects your Swarm or your Docker server to that automatically. So yeah. The storage stuff is like a sub-project of your main project, just to get all that working. So, all right, so if that's it for the questions, I'm going to wrap it up. You can, as always, I do this every Thursday, and I appreciate you coming out, hanging out with me, asking great questions. Some of the great clips and things that I actually have good answers for may end up in my podcast. So if you missed part of the show, you can either watch this video back here later once it's posted on YouTube, or you can subscribe to my podcast and get some of these clips and some of the short stuff in short little audio format for when you're on your commute or when you're mowing the yard or walking the dog like we do. So thanks so much again for joining. You can get all of my resources over at brettfisher.com, which is that link up there. I will see you next time live on YouTube next week. Thanks.